Hi, everyone. My name is Annelisa Purdy, and I'm a senior children's librarian at the New York Public Library. Today, I'm going to give an example of an oral story. This is a folk tale from Ghana in West Africa, and it's called Too Much Talk. It's also called Talk Talk or the Talking Yam. It goes by different titles, but whichever title you may find it under, the basic story is pretty much the same. So let's get ready for Too Much Talk. Once long ago, there was a farmer named Akwesi, and he lived among the Ashanti people in Ghana. Every day, Akwesi went out to his fields, and he'd plant and water and hoe back and back and forth until it was harvest time. And as he went out at harvest time, he thought about all the money he would make from pulling up his different fruits and vegetables and taking them to market. And he walked right over to his patch of yams. As he started digging up the yams, he thought to himself, "Oh, these yams are so beautiful and delicious. People are going to look at them and get excited and say, 'I want some of Akwesi's yams because he grows the best.'" And as he started hoeing and picking the yams up one by one, all of a sudden, when he reached for a big, fat, juicy one, the yam said, "Get your hands off of me." Akwesi dropped his hoe and he dropped the bag that he had to put the yams inside. He rubbed his eyes, he shook his head, and he said to himself, "No, no, no. I didn't hear what I think I heard." And he went to reach for the yam again. And just as he reached for the yam again, the yam said, "Didn't I tell you not to touch me?" Akwesi stopped and he stared. The yam said, "You've got a lot of nerve, Akwesi. You should have watered me. You should have paid attention to me. But no, I sat here and grew myself. And now you've got your nerve trying to pick me up and put me in a basket and take me to market where people will eat me. Leave me alone. Go on, shoot, get out of here." Akwesi stopped and he shook. He shook again. He still couldn't believe that this yam was talking to him. So he shook his head again and said, "No, no, I didn't hear that. Yams don't talk." And just as he said that, his dog, who happened to be in the field next to him, said, "Woof!" Sounded like he talked to me. Akwesi stopped. He looked at his dog and he looked back at the yam and he couldn't believe what was happening to him, all in the morning, too. The dog looked at Akwesi and said again, "Woof! What's the matter with you? You can hear that yam, can't you?" "Be quiet," Akwesi said to the dog. "Be quiet. Stop talking to me. Stop." And the dog said, "Woof! You can't tell me what to do." By this time, Akwesi had had enough. He decided that he was going to teach that dog a lesson. So he went right to the tree that was near his field and went to cut off a branch to smack the dog with, which isn't too nice. He took his knife and he walked over to the tree, and just as he was about to cut a branch off, the branch said with a big leaf on it, "Hey, leave me alone. What are you cutting me for? I didn't do anything to you. Put me down." Akwesi dropped his knife and he dropped the branch because he was so shocked. When he dropped the branch with the big leaf on it, it landed plop right on a rock. And then the rock said, "Get that branch off of me. I didn't ask you for any shade." By this time, Akwesi couldn't take any more. He dropped everything and he started running. He began running and running and running and running. And as he ran, he said, I'll tell the king about this. He has to hear this, because back in those days there was a king. He kept running and running and running. And as he was running, he came across a man who was carrying a bundle of cloth on his head to take to market. And McQuasey was very sweaty by this time, just running and running and running. The man with the basket of cloth on his head turned and said, wait a minute, stop, stop, stop. I can't stop, McQuasey said. And he breathed, and he breathed, and he breathed. I've got to go tell the king something that happened to me. And the man said, calm down for a minute. What happened to you? What's going on? And he said, my yam, McQuasey, my yam. It talked to me. I went this morning to get all of the vegetables out of my garden. And then when I went to pick up the yam said, leave me alone. And I said, no, yams don't talk. And then my dog said, yes, the yam was talking. And then the dog said, what's the matter? Can't you hear it? So I went to get a switch to tell the dog to stop talking. And then the branch talked to me and said, don't cut me. And then when I dropped the branch, it fell on the rock. And the rock said, get that branch off me. I don't want any shade. And now I'm going to tell the king everything that happened to see if he'll believe me. Now by this time, the man who had the basket of clothes on his head was very, very puzzled by what McQuasey told him. And he said, my friend, I think you need to calm down a bit. And as he said that, the basket of clothes on his head, of cloth on his head, rustled, went swish, 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 swish. That is a strange story. A yam and a dog talking? Yow! The man dropped the basket of cloth that was on his head and left it on the ground. And now he and McQuasey started running and running and running. They were sweaty and they were getting dusty, running and running to town to tell the king what had happened. And as they were running, they came across a fisherman who was carefully gathering the fish out of the river and putting it into a basket so that he could sell it at the market too. He saw them coming across, all sweaty and looking very, very excited, and said, wait a minute, stop. What's the matter? My yam, McQuasey said out of breath. My yam. It talked to me. I was going to get the vegetables to bring to market today, and when I went to pick up the yam said, leave me alone. And I said, yams don't talk. And then my dog said, of course yams talk. Can't you hear him? And then I went to get a branch to switch the dog. And when I went to cut the branch said, leave me alone. And when I dropped the branch fell on the rock. And the rock said, get that off me. I didn't ask for any shade. And then I ran to meet this man here. And then, said the man who had the basket of cloth on his head, when I listened to his story, the cloth that was on my head said, a talking yam sounds ridiculous. And now we're running to tell the king what happened. The fisherman looked back and forth from McQuasey to the man who had the cloth on his head. And he said, my friends, I think that you need to drink some water because both of you seem very, very excited. Then the net that he was holding started to shake, and the fish bloop, bloop, popped their head up and said, indeed, these men definitely need to stop running. A talking yam? Talking cloth? Very strange indeed. Whoa! The fisherman dropped the fish that was in his net. He stared at it on the ground. And then all of a sudden he, the man with the cloth, and McQuasey started running, all three of them, into the village to tell the king what had happened. And as they were running, all sweaty, they came across a man who was taking a bath in the river, scrubbing himself and pouring water over his head. And when he saw these three men running past in the middle of his morning bath, he looked at them and told them, stop, my friends. What's the matter? Are you okay? Everyone's looking so excited. McQuasey stopped and he breathed deeply and said, My yam, my yam talked to me. I was getting my vegetables for the market, and I went to pick up my yam. And when I went to reach for the yam said to me, "Leave me alone, don't touch me." And then I said, "Yams don't talk." And my dog said, "Of course yams talk. Don't you hear him?" And then when I went to get a switch to get my dog to make him be quiet, the branch that I went to cut said, "Leave me alone, take that knife away from me." And when I dropped the branch on a rock, the rock said, "Get that off of me. I didn't ask you for any shade." And then I ran and I came to this man here. And then I heard his story, said the man who had the cloth on his head. And when I told him that it sounded very strange, the cloth bristled and it said, "Who ever heard of a talking yam?" And then we ran and they came to me, the fisherman said. And I heard this story, and I said, "This is a very strange story indeed." And then the fish that were in my net popped up and said, "A talking dog and a talking yam? These men are very excited." And then we're running to tell the king what's happened so he can tell us what to do. The man who was bathing looked back and forth between all three of these men and said, "I see. Are you sure that you all don't want to sit down for a minute and rest?" And then, as he was in the water burbled and it rippled and said, "Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh, swoosh." Yes, I think they do need to sit down. Although I've never heard of a talking yam. What a story. Ah! The bather jumped out of the water, and he forgot his clothes, and joined Aquasi, the man with the cloth, and the fisherman as they ran into the city to see the king. Now, by this time, it was a little later in the morning. Everyone was at the market going about, and the four men ran past the big gates to go straight into the palace. The guards asked, "What are you doing here?" And they said, "The king. We have to see the king. We have to tell the king this story." And so usually the guards didn't let people in, but all of these men looked very excited and a little scared. So they said, "Follow us." And they took each of the men into the king's throne room, where he was sitting on a stool. The king looked at each of these men who were dusty and excited, and one of them who had forgotten his clothes, and said, "What's the meaning of this? What is going on?" "My yam," said Aquasi. "My yam, your majesty. It talked to me this morning. I was going to get my vegetables to go into the marketplace, and when I reached for the yam, it said, 'Don't touch me, leave me alone.' And I said to myself, 'Yams don't talk.' And then my dog said, 'Of course yams talk. Didn't you hear him?' And when I went to cut a branch to make a switch to make my dog behave, the branch said, 'Don't touch me, put that knife away.' And when I dropped the branch on the rock said, 'Get that branch off of me. I didn't ask you for any shade.' And so I ran until he met me," the man with the cloth on his head said. And then when he told me the story, the cloth that I was carrying on my head, majesty, it said, "I've never heard of a talking yam before." And so then we ran until they came to me, the fisherman said, who had tears streaming down his face by this time. I listened to both of their stories, and I thought that it was very, very strange. And then the fish in my net went bloop, bloop. These men are very exciting indeed. We've never heard such a story. And then I dropped my net and I joined them, and we all ran until they met me, the bather said, who still didn't have any clothes on, and everyone in the hall was very shocked. I listened to all three of their stories, and I thought it was quite strange, your majesty. But then the river where I was bathing said, "These men are very excited. They need to sit down." And then we ran because we wanted to tell you all that had happened. There was silence in the throne room. The king looked back and forth between all four of these men. And he sat, and for a moment he didn't say anything. Then the king took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a minute, and when he opened them, he said, "All four of you should be ashamed of yourselves, causing a disturbance in the middle of market day, coming into my palace with silly stories. And you," he said to the bather, "where are your clothes? Get him some clothes," he said to an attendant, who very quickly came and brought some clothes for the bather to put on. "All four of you need to go back home immediately before I punish you for disturbing the peace. Such silly stories. Lie down, drink some water, something, but don't come and disturb us with these things again. Ridiculous. Go on." And so all four of the men, who by this time were very tired, bowed and left the throne room and went back to their farms and to their houses. Well, after the men had left, the king eased himself onto his stool and shook his head. "I can't believe it. Silly," he said to himself, "causing a disturbance, yelling all over the place, wild eyes, all of these things talking. Can't believe it. My goodness." And then the stool that the king was sitting on rocked back and forth and said, "I agree. What ridiculous stories. Who ever heard of a talking yam?" Too Much Talk is an example of a cumulative story, one that builds and adds characters and events until it reaches its ending. One thing that you can do if you'd like is to get different objects to make sound effects for things such as the fish or running or the water, or to get plushies, different objects around the house that you can use to represent certain characters. You can also have children, if they enjoy drawing, draw pictures of what they hear. Another fun thing about this story is the way that it ends. It ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. It has a bit of an open ending. So one question, for example, would be to ask children, what do you think happened to the king after the stool talked back to him? Or what do you think Akwesi and his friends are going to do when they go back to their farms and their houses? And that's another way to continue the story, to listen to what children have to say and to get different ideas about what you all think might happen. Now, I first had this story read to me when I was very young by my mother, hi Mom, in a book called Talk by Deborah M. Newton Chocolate. It's part of a series called Legends of the World that collects legends from and folk tales and fairy tales from different cultures around the world and put them into picture book form. This story is also available, if you'd like to read it, in a book called Too Much Talk by Angela Shelf Medeiros. Now, both of these books are out of print, although they are available for purchase on different sites such as Amazon. If you'd like a more readily available way to access this story, I highly recommend Best Love Folk Tales of the World, which is edited by Joanna Cole. And the fun thing about this book is that each of the stories inside of it are organized geographically. So it's got West African stories, East African stories, stories from North America and South America and the Pacific Islands, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and so on. I hope that you all have enjoyed this. Remember that children get excited about any type of storytelling activity, no matter how long or short it is. And I hope that this has given you some ideas for starting this journey with those own special children in your life. Thanks again for joining me. Have fun, stay safe, and I'll talk to everyone soon. Bye.